Hey friends, I hope you're doing well. Today I finally want to share with you my top 5 tips for setting up your art space at home for your children and for you. Because as we know, we're going to be creating a lot together in our households these days. So these are my top 5 recommendations to consider when you're looking at your art space in your house. No matter how big or small your space is, I think these thoughts might help guide some decisions. Some of these might be obvious, but here goes anyway. So here's number 1. This is actually a very fundamental, basic premise of any great Montessori environment. You have a balance of freedom and responsibility. What we mean by this is you set the parameters for however broad their freedoms are going to be. And in your house, that's up to you to decide upon. Within that freedom, you want to allow for some choice, some freedom of independence, and some freedom of movement. And by that, I mean, like in an art space, you want your child to be able to freely go to a shelf or wherever, bookcase or wherever your things are going to be, and get what they need and use them and clean them up, and then be able to put them back all on their own, independently. And you want to allow for some choice of material. Notice I'm not saying total free choice, I mean some choice. So you decide how many choices live within those parameters that you're going to set up. So this balance of freedom and responsibility is kind of always growing and ebbing and flowing based on what you are experiencing and how it's going with your children. And as they grow older, of course, the freedoms might expand because they're able to handle the responsibility of more materials being out at once, or better materials being out that they know how to use and use judiciously and so forth. So that's my number 1 thing to look for, is what are going to be your kind of parameters. Find your balance of freedom and responsibility and base it on how things are going with materials being used, things being cleaned up, and whatever your children are able to really be responsible for, because it also really deeply satisfies them when they know they can handle these parameters and they can feel like, yeah, I can do this and I can handle this environment and it's designed for me. So with that, I'm going to give you a little tour around our current art room space. It's about to change. I'm so excited to dive in on this little project we have, but I'll show you what we have set up and what we've had set up for a little while. All right, tip number 2. This has to do with the easy access part of what we were talking about. For anything that you've now decided they can have access to and use independently based on their capabilities. So by easy access, I mean, again, that they can take it out, use it easily on a workspace that is sized for them, and then clean up what they used and then put it all back, and I'll show you what I mean. All right, so in our space, we have this little shelf that has everything that can be used by both children in our house. We have a 5-year-old and an 11-year-old. So really different capabilities of what they can handle, but this area kind of has what everybody uses and needs. We have kind of all the basics, scissors, glue, pencils, rulers, markers are more kind of my daughter's thing, but actually pretty much everybody uses them. We inherited this beautiful stand for Prismacolors. So everybody uses those and knows how to be careful with those. And then other materials that mostly my daughter uses that are out all the time. She can freely come and she takes them out. She sits right at this table. This table gets a lot of action every single day. Lots of projects going on at this table. It is remarkably clean at this moment, but it never really looks like this. But this table is her size. It's right next to where she would take things out and use them. And then we are fortunate to be using this space, which is technically the dining room of the house, and it's right next to the kitchen, and there's the sink right there. So she gets the stool out, pulls it right up to the sink, cleans, and then puts stuff in the drying rack, and then it comes back when it's done and gets put back. It really helps to have things out of their original boxes and containers and to use any little kind of boxes or trays that you might have. This is, you know, one of those little fruit trays. They're actually really cool for storing different things in. Mason jars I'm a big fan of. So we have everything out in a way that's attractive and enticing to use, but easy to put back. So that's key. And then of course the workspace. I'll just show you another area here that is also kind of under the easy access kind of category. This brilliant little set of drawers has been very handy. We keep all kinds of different papers in here, including like a couple of these trays are for paper scraps that we want to keep because they're good papers, but they're great for collaging or whatever, just different creating. We have a drawer of like kind of recycled papers that still can be used, and then a drawer for plain white paper. I'll talk more about this later. And then some other like coloring books and things that we have on hand. And then up on the top, which also my daughter can reach, all the paint brushes and kind of more painting supplies. We do have this big bookshelf, and I have some things in the kind of easy access category that she can reach. This is a big pile of actually finished work that we might use again or turn into other projects like collage. It's like painted papers or I don't know, just different projects that either got half done, but they're worth keeping because there's something kind of interesting about them, or we want to do something more with them, like this cute little heart card. We might decorate some more, you know, little random things. I do also, actually, I'm going to talk more about what's up here in another tip, but for now, these are the things we have out and easily accessible. Basically this shelf and this little shelf, and of course, this is the workspace that my younger daughter uses. This is the workspace over here that is more like a full height table and chairs, just an old set that we have. We do often use this space for drying things, but we do big family projects here and that kind of thing. Tip number 3, limit what you have out. Don't ever put like all your art supplies that you just bought out, unless they're really all those basic ones that you can really be fully independent with. But I usually have a limited amount of especially papers that are out and able to be used whenever. And then I have another stash that is kept kind of out of reach. It's actually right there behind me. I have these boxes up here that keep different papers, especially like watercolor paper, which is expensive. I have to get out the piece of watercolor paper every time my daughter wants to watercolor or my son wants to watercolor. And it's really helpful. And it kind of gives the idea like, okay, this is special paper. We've, spent some good money on it. We're going to use it like really properly. And that's also why we keep, where is it? This, this pile of already created projects. A lot of those are done on watercolor paper, and they are kind of cool patterns or something, but it's good paper and it's interesting material to work with in a future project, like for collage or whatever. I'll show you one more thing, kind of in this category of a limited supply. In this drawer, this is plain white copy paper. There's just like a little thin stack of this out, which is pretty much on purpose, because if I had a whole ream of paper in here, it would just go and go and go and go. So a little bit of a limited supply is a good idea. That's also why I have recycled paper here, because a lot of times, my younger daughter's just creating, or my son wants to doodle or something, and it just helps to have materials that you don't mind if they go and go, if you're going to have them out in an easily accessible area. So limit the supply, have a backup stash somewhere where you can get to it, but nobody else can get to it. Tip number 4, have a plan for unfinished work and finished work, because if you have a massively creative creator like my daughter in the house, there is project after project after project going on, a lot of which don't get completed, and that's okay. Not every project is going to get completed. Like, think of our own projects in our adult life. There are projects that we start that definitely don't get completed, and that's okay. That's kind of back to that pile of kind of randomness there that we are going to use again. Some of the unfinished stuff goes there. For the unfinished work that for whatever reason can't be completed in one sitting, here's what I do. I'm going to flip the camera around and show you a couple places where we deal with that. Here's one spot. There's a little tray, and it has some unfinished projects. Actually, this has 2 projects in it right now. There's a little drawing that she wanted to do more on, and then there's a collage that she started that she hasn't quite finished. So this makes it really obvious, like how many projects she has going on. And if this is piling up, then I kind of have a friendly conversation about, well, let's try to finish some of these projects before we just keep going on getting a new project out again and again and again. Another area where we keep unfinished things, actually this is a big one that's been a long time work in process, kind of a castle that she's building out of a box. So that's been there. And then I do have another tray of unfinished projects. This is actually just a shoebox lid. So I think I talked in my other video about shoe boxes, very useful, especially the kid size ones. But some little kind of way to contain the situation. I'm a big fan of that. And it's a kind of visual reminder. Oh yeah, we're already working on these kind of things that are going. So before we start a new one, is there anything we could finish up? Let's talk about finished work. So we have this little hanging strip on our wall. When we redo this room and set it back up, I actually want to have one of these that is higher up like that, so we have more display space, but also one that's further down on the wall so that my younger daughter can reach it herself and use there's really just a little wire that is attached to 2 nails on the ends, and then there's little clothespins along, and that's where we display all kinds of finished work. It's heavily loaded right now with stuff. And usually every once in a while I go through it and I kind of figure out like which ones are keepers that were particularly great for whatever reason. And I'm a little bit limited on how many of those I keep. We could have a whole other conversation on like, how do you decide which pieces of art your child did that you keep and which ones you let go of? But I try to be pretty choosy and choose some really great ones that have a lot of personality and expression in them. So until I go through and choose, they kind of hang up here so that we can see them for a while. We just display them up there for a while, and then I take it all down and we kind of choose what goes in the keeper pile and we let go of the rest, or we put it back into that random pile where we can maybe cut it up and use it in a future collage or something. So that's finished work. That's basically the only place we have for finished work. And then obviously in the keepsake box, that's where the really good stuff goes. Tip number 5. All right, so this has more to do with how you are about this space, not quite so much the physical setup of it, but here's the tip. Insist on good cleanup practices. So I'm sure you've seen me allude to this all through this video, but you might have to be very persistent in helping your child develop those habits and really following through on those habits. My younger one is definitely still kind of training herself on how to really complete her whole cleanup process independently. This often looks like at that younger age, like I'm doing it with her and there are kind of reminders, oh, we didn't quite clean up all of it yet. There's still a couple things, how can I help you? And we do it kind of side by side. As they get older, obviously, they can get much more used to, especially if you've had a really consistent kind of expectation around their cleanup, they need one reminder and then they'll go back and clean it up, or they need no reminders, and that's beautiful. And I would really, really promote the idea that you insist on good cleanup, because that is part of the whole process. And then the space gets put back and ready for the next person to come along and do some cool artwork in the same space and use the materials, and they still look organized and beautiful, and that's a good thing. So I guess along the same lines, I would also insist on using the materials how they're meant to be used and using them respectfully. So if you see, like, I didn't actually talk much about this, but I kind of keep our painting supply a little bit higher up because my son can definitely come and use these independently, and he knows how to use them really well and really respectfully. My daughter also is quite good about it now because I have kind of stated over and over every time we're sitting together to use them that a little bit of paint goes a long way. You don't just glob on a whole, bunch of paint into the palette or whatever. And I've kind of repeated that mantra over and over when we're working together. Not in a harsh way or anything, just consistent and like, no, this is just part of what we're doing. So it's part of the process. So that's my big tip number 5, because you can really easily get overwhelmed by whatever space you have set up. It can kind of explode into a hot mess pretty quickly. And a mess for a little bit is okay if the mess gets cleaned up. So I'm all for a good messy project because those can be the most fun, but just be consistent and don't give up on following through on that cleanup. Sometimes it can take a long time to really get that down, but if you put the time in to insist upon it, it becomes part of the habit, and then they just know that's how we're going to use our art materials. So those were our 5 tips, and I hope that they're helpful to you. I hope that you can figure out a little space in your house that works for some cool projects. And if you feel like it, post some pictures of your space and what you're using, or just even one shelf that you have set up, or a room that you have set up, or part of a room. I would love to see it. And I will show you some pictures as we go along and we kind of attack this room and get that old wallpaper off the walls and the old carpet out of here. I'll be excited to show you our space as it transforms. So happy creating, have fun, and just enjoy the process and enjoy your space. All right, be well. Thanks. Bye-bye.